All right. Less Than Zero by Bret, Easton, Ellis is a 1985 novel. It's a quick read. It's about 208 pages. This was Bret Easton Ellis's first novel. I think it's overrated, and let me explain why. I give it a solid 6.8, almost a 7 out of 10. It's a book about rich, druggy kids in LA in the 1980s, and the negative effects of certain lifestyle patterns and choices, and in general vices of one character in particular named Clay, our main character, who in some ways is still an innocent kid, but is just so spiritually diseased by vices in a place and time in America that's highly specific, that really honestly overall reveals how trapped he actually is and how disassociated from himself that he really is. Now, that even shows in the writing itself, which is the biggest takeaway for me that makes this a worthwhile read that I can only truly recommend to people who love the art of studying creative writing and the ability to immerse people. Although the substance of the story is highly negative and makes you feel amazingly sick, as if you were falling asleep or in a drugged out state yourself, because it's just so authentic down to the very minuscule details of narration, focusing on the way when the mind is in a sort of nauseous condition, it can over focus on, like an acid trip, like the little details of something, and then go back to a larger, more pertinent description of a narrative that moves the plot to another place. Now, that frenetic, constant scene changing energy is so brilliantly written, but it ultimately lacks a narrative. But that, yet at the same time, it was kind of the point. By that I mean it's perhaps unintentionally meta, by through this nonsense plot of this kid just constantly looking to recapture and rediscover what joy is, because he's so spiritually burnt out and emotionally dead inside, which the nature of anyone who has any experience with any addiction of any kind knows what that's like. Like the scenes that change from place to place are a series of descriptions that somehow give an overall sense of meaning, although nothing in particularly is actually said. So it has a tone that's so strong you could say that it has its own voice, but the voice comes down to being one long tone of cautionary, like as if to say, don't be like this character, don't get in this state of mind. And that makes it interesting and memorable, but a very eerie, sickening feeling that like you're drawn into almost unaware, and you genuinely don't feel like the same person by the time you finish it. At least I didn't. Also, I don't really look at the city of Los Angeles the same. It feels like so. I don't know much about Bret Easton Ellis, but from the little I've heard, and having just finished this book, it's impossible for me to imagine that this was anything but based on a sort of autobiographical, true, authentic account. And I really, really admire it for its honesty for that. The deeply sad part is that what that shows you is that evil was very alive in that time, and probably has gotten worse at this point. That is something that I don't think the people that market and advertise and talk about or remember this book for to this day emphasize enough, which is another incentive for me to lend my own critique. So, and that's also a bit of a caution for sensitive readers or people that don't enjoy studying evil with the intention of being able to identify it, perhaps protect yourself or others from it, to learn from negative examples, because this book has a lot of negative energy in it. And like I said before, it really takes you off guard in the last third in a way that is just, to me personally, went too far for me to be able to recommend to anyone with any sort of responsibility. And I don't think this is an essential classic at all. But in the first two thirds, there's this very slight, perhaps unintentional feeling of hope that just comes from the life of the energy of the way that initial pursuit for like pleasure. And in that sense, it really captures the way that being drugged tricks you into thinking that the culmination of the pleasure that might lead to something like joy is going to hit. It's going to come and arrive at some point, but instead it becomes this frenetic, like almost schizophrenic search for that which really basically is the embodiment of addiction, which is really scary, and then takes a really scary sharp downward turn and like towards the end. And so when I say it goes too far, spoiler alert, I'm going to spoil part of the plot. It involves child sexual abuse, and to me, I don't understand exactly why. It would have felt more justified to include that in the narrative if the author had something moral to say about that. The main character, has nothing to say except a faint, vague realization that I probably shouldn't be involved in this. He's not really condoning it or drawn into it. He sort of has this brief 2-second wake-up call in which he's more so protecting himself, not doing anything for the abuse victim, and cowardly just removing himself from it. Because at that point, my theory is that his empathy has been burned out of his heart by just this sort of retardation, damnation type of thing that comes by being overloaded with selfish emotion seeking and pleasures, which he's not really fully conscious. This is also what, another spoiler, ends his primary relationship by the end. The reason his girlfriend leaves him is because he more or less just doesn't, he's not awake enough, he doesn't care enough, he can't offer a woman at this stage in his life the things that she needs, more or less. I mean, it's not like she doesn't have huge problems too, which mirror his own, but he really doesn't have any initiative. And the character is honest and relatable to most people, most likely for that reason, living in the Western world today, and since the 80s, but he's not particularly likable. So for some people, it might be this wake-up call, this sort of like reflective mirror-like experience. For me, it was interesting, but that's about it. So a solid 6.8 out of 10. I really, it's like intentionally a book about nothing, almost with a slice of life quality, kind of like one of my favorite movies in this poster behind me here, that just has that immersive quality that really transports you there. Even though I didn't enjoy reading it, it was did compel me forward. So I admire the book for that as well. Let's see, what else was there to say? I could expound more on certain theories and certain symbols and certain qualities, but the book as an experience as a whole, for people interested in analyzing a person's suffering through stylistic means, this might be the most powerful book I've read to this point. But powerful doesn't necessarily mean good. And I don't give this book merit in terms of enlightenment, and anyone who says so is really disillusioned with themselves and confusing like the ability to be commercially satiated with sensory knowledge and carnal knowledge and information with joy and enlightenment and things of a higher level of quality, which is one of the reasons why I exist as a critic, bitch. So anyway, because I'm just that good. I'm just that great. Really? No, not really, but it's up for your interpretation. But basically, this is about as much art as is in this book, and so go figure, like we don't, as similar individuals, we don't all get along, even though we're all looking for something. One of my favorite scenes, Clay is in search of nostalgia, a time when he remembering what it was like to be happy and innocent as a kid before he lost his innocence. So he goes back to his school looking for a connection because he's so spiritually dead inside. There's another scene where he remembers driving a car, listening to certain music, almost like a flashbulb memory, nostalgia quality that brings back the memory of what that felt like. And most people who age and go through certain mistakes that are typical of humanity can relate to that as well. That really has that cautionary dark tone that I was talking about before. And the if it was to go any further into explore, like as a cautionary tale, which it's not, it's more of has a cautionary tone. I didn't mean to say it was a cautionary tale beyond like literally in terms of the plot, But in terms of the tone and the general feeling you get, it being such a just artistic sort of story that is told with storytelling mechanisms, it will haunt you. It does have a sort of cursed quality that really can be kind of a wake up call to some people. But if it were to go any further than that and become a full-on cautionary tale, then I think it would be American Psycho, and that's just my personal theory. This is my first. I wanted to start with Bret Easton Ellis' novels at the first one because I heard so much about them. I always wanted to read them, and I'm definitely interested in seeing where he continues to go with this sort of honest look at fearless exploration of that dark side of humanity that a lot of people don't want to see, and I don't blame them. Anyway, yes, Less Than Zero, very powerful, interesting, memorable, effective, but not enjoyable, and perhaps not the best for your spiritual health. So I don't feel responsible recommending it to anyone. I didn't necessarily enjoy reading it, and its lack of moral responsibility and altruism regarding the inclusion of very extreme portrayal of child sexual abuse filled me with anger and didn't seem justified in terms of message, but perhaps in terms of narrative, but only on a speculative level, because I don't know, and I don't even know if the author knows why it was there. And he frequently brings up that question when little elements of sadism creep into little small insignificant moments in the book that are shocking. The character asks, why? What is this about? Why do people do these things? And I saw this done very effectively in a film I recently watched, 8mm, with Nick Cage and Joaquin Phoenix and James Gandolfini. Very good movie that reminded me a lot of this film. I assume that movie had to be inspired by aspects of it, especially with the inclusion of a snuff film, which is another part where it's kind of I appreciate the fact this book challenged me, and then it unexpectedly hits you like a ton of bricks when it happens. Like, you really don't see it coming, and I think that's, if there is a sort of cautionary tale literally in the plot of this book, it would be Clay's exposure to the criminal aspects of being surrounded in the company of people that have descended even lower in vices, and the long-term effects that has on the body, mind, and spirit around him. And it gets him into these situations in which he's starting to basically lose control, lose his shit, and if he gets any worse, he might develop some sort of cursed schizophrenia. And basically, he's able to, by implication towards the end, seem to make a change in his life and remove himself from the situation. So it's not completely hopeless by the end. I think American Psycho is exploring some of the similar themes on a greater level, where that deals more with sadism. But sadism is more of an afterthought in this novel. This novel is more of what might lead up to that. So altogether, it is sort of incredible in many ways, most of them dealing with style rather than actual substance. But yeah, I don't really recommend it. So yeah, that's my thoughts on... Oh, one more thing. My favorite line of all, or my favorite scene of all, is when Clay is trying to flirt with some beautiful young woman, and then he's with his family in public, and he calls his grandpa or something on the phone, and he says, "Merry Christmas, Grandpa," just in a sort of drugged out state of mind, always having a stoner brain, and he's just not really hearing himself, and he reverts back to a more childish version of himself, which is brought out of him by not seeing his grandpa in a while, and then he feels embarrassed being, now a fully grown post-pubescent young man, albeit in front of this woman, and then he feels stupid about it. And that's just some of the most, just that little thing is something that will haunt me in a good way and make me remember that people caught up in evil are still loved by God, for one, and also still have redeemable qualities and potential to change. And there is an innocent kid inside of everybody. I don't care what you think if you disagree with that. That's something I know for a fact and believe. And so anyway, it is very much a tragedy, a very effective tragedy for people who want a challenge and an effective experience. I don't think I've ever read a book like this before. I don't think I'm the same person after finishing reading it. Very, very good, very interesting. Solid 6.8, almost 7 out of 10. Yeah. Less than zero, Bret Easton Ellis.